All right, so we're here with the newest Abundo team member, Sarah Dickinson. Sarah joined our team just a few weeks ago, and as we like to do, each person who joins the Abundo team, they bring a very interesting and diverse perspective and set of expertise to the table. We hire people from a wide range of backgrounds, and that's one of the really nice things about it. And Sarah has been a solo business owner in the past, and a lot of our clients are, and you have different types of businesses. And so what we really wanted to do was just hear a little bit about Sarah's experience and some of the recommendations, things that she's learned from her own lived experience about being a solo business owner. And I know one of the themes will be, it's not the same for anyone. So we know
Yes.
that that'll be the case from the outset, but this will be about what Sarah experienced and some of the major things that she learned. So with that, Sarah, I'd love to just hear a little bit about your background and especially about the business that you've owned in the past.
Yeah, thanks for having me. So my background is primarily in like photography or like content creation. I dabbled in like blog writing for a while, but primarily it's photography. And I do wedding photography. And then I also did some commercial work for like Airbnb and Wayfair. But nowadays it's really mostly weddings.
Very cool. And do you still do that? How often do you do it, or is it something where you had to have a clean break?
Yeah, no, I still do it. I feel like it's always going to be a part of my life in some capacity.
Hmm.
And the nice thing about photography is that there is this ability to kind of ebb and flow with whatever other work I might be doing at the time. So obviously with this, financial planning is a full-time job. I won't be booking as many clients probably next year. And I guess that's the other thing too, since most weddings are booked like a year out in advance. As long as you kind of have an idea of what your next year may look like, you can kind of decide if you want to book more or less, and just make sure everybody's a really good fit.
Yeah, that's great. And how do you go about finding your clients? You mentioned being a good fit. So how do you find someone? What kind of outreach do you do to build your book of business? And then how do you know if they're going to be a good fit?
Yeah, I don't know what the right analogy is, but I am like the worst at like posting on Instagram and doing all of that stuff. But I've been in business for a while at this point. So most of our work just comes from referrals from past clients. So yeah, I don't really do too much in particular. We're trying to get better about posting on social media, but even that is just it's so difficult for me
And
anyways.
and maybe that leads to a branch of a couple of questions that a lot of
Sure.
people I know that are struggling with client acquisition is one of the biggest things that
Mm.
seems to be a hard thing. So when you were before you had the sort of snowball of referrals, how did you go
Mhm.
about getting your first couple clients?
Yes. So my very, very first client, which I use that term loosely as it relates to
Hmm.
that very first job, was actually when I was in photography school. And one of our instructors, I think it was like someone that they knew was just looking for wedding photography and they had a smaller budget. And I thought that was a good way to, dip my toe into paid work. And that was how I got my very first wedding. And I
Hmm.
mean, we're talking like, I don't know, 15 years ago. So now
Oh, wow.
I am trying to
Yeah.
think back to how things started. Definitely at the beginning when I was like building my portfolio, I was taking work for a lot less than what was kind of like industry standard price wise in the area. But that's very common with photography
Mhm.
is when you're kind of building your portfolio, you will maybe do things at a reduced rate or do shoots for what's the right word? Like trade kind of. You'll do like
Yeah,
trade work with other
that makes
people.
perfect sense.
And then that just evolves and grows and builds. And then also, again, so with photo, a lot of like second shooting for other people who were already established in the industry and just networking and meeting people. For in New England, anyways, there are a handful of different like photography Facebook groups where people are
Mhm.
constantly putting out referrals. So that's another way to kind of start throwing, your name in the hat for certain jobs. So that's
Got it.
I'm pretty sure when I'm thinking back, I feel like that's probably how things got going. And then, with time and friends start getting married or having babies, and then just snowballs.
Yeah. And do you do anything proactively to encourage that snowball of referrals, or does it just happen because of the good work that you're doing?
It sort of just happens. I am trying to get in a better habit of reaching back out for like testimonials and things like that to put on the website and keep those like the kind words fresh. But honestly, it's mostly just referral business for us at this point, or for me at this point.
That makes sense. And then obviously you have to come up with what your service is and the pricing for it. And pricing is something that can be a little bit tricky when you have to do it on your own. So I'm curious how
Mhm.
you have come to settle on your prices and what the service includes and what kind of research you might have had to do to come to that.
Yeah, so I will say there is no settling on the price. It's
Hmm.
always changes a little bit year to year or every couple of years. I don't look at pricing as something that's set in stone. You kind of have to look at your market and see what are other people charging, what services are they offering for those, or what services they're offering for those prices. And I mean, even if someone's prices are completely different, their life is different too. So we'll put that in there as a caveat. But yeah, so for when I started, and I was actually kind of doing things professionally, I think really getting a handle on, what your own individual expenses are as like a person, like how much money do you need to actually live your life? And then what are the expenses of your business? Getting a handle on what those numbers are. Like I said, doing some market research and figuring out what other people are charging in your area. And that kind of will help you determine maybe how many clients you might need to make all those numbers work
Hmm.
together. Um, and then figuring out exactly what you want to offer for each. Like, so for me, anyways, we have three different packages essentially based on hours. So someone could book like a 6 hour package, an 8 hour package, or a 10 hour package of photography. Um, there's no other benefits to booking the 10 hour, like you don't get like a free wedding album or something like that. So I feel like those extra little things that people might put in their packages differ a lot from person to person, but the those like main prices, I feel like we really try to stay within industry standard. And then every year, as we're looking at um, who is inquiring, just kind of seeing like, all right, are we like way overpriced for the people that are coming to us? And what does that say? Like, is it like is our branding and our message being geared towards these other people, or are our prices too high? So it is something that we're just constantly thinking about and reevaluating, especially as inflation, things like that. But there have been years where we've actually lowered prices too, because we realize the service is overpriced for what people are looking for.
That's great. And so you're
So
on the market side, you're constantly assessing, reevaluating, figuring out what to offer. And the other thing I really like that you said is that you did a more of an introspective view of what your life costs and that
mhm,
bottoms up approach of, well, if I do this many wedding shoots a year, how much do
right,
I need to charge? Is that in the ballpark of what's reasonable? Could I earn a living that I need from
right.
that? It's a very good way to conceptualize it. And okay, so now you've got this business, and it's just you. And so, if I'm more of a corporate background, and that
Mhm.
means that I had an accounting team and a finance team and a legal team and a marketing team, and all, so you're doing all of those things. Have you hired any professionals to like kind of offload any of those things to as a team? Do you have a like CPA, anything like that, or have you always been more of a do-it-yourself across the whole spectrum of the parts of your business?
Definitely mostly DIY. I
Mhm.
kind of thrive in the chaos of that a little bit, being able to, try all the pieces of, business ownership. When I first started, I definitely did not have a CPA. I honestly was like, I don't know what I'm doing at the
Yeah.
beginning. And then as, bookings grew and I had more clients, I was like, okay, I think I need to, ask for help. Um, and then I've moved a few times. So you have to find a new CPA. So we're in the middle of. I keep saying we because my husband now also shoots with me, so
Hmm.
he's a photographer too. Um, so we both shoot separately, and then we also do work together depending on the needs of the client. But yeah, so a CPA is really the only like hired professional. that I would say that I have as a part of my team.
Mhm.
And then everyone else that I really think of as a part of my team are just all of these other trusted creative professionals that I have found through networking that I feel
Mhm.
comfortable being like, hey, I'm not sure what I'm supposed to do. Like almost more of like a mentorship
Oh, that's great.
capacity, you know? So I think just finding other people that who are in your niche, who you feel comfortable asking questions to. If you don't feel comfortable like asking questions in like a larger group format on like a Facebook group or something like that.
Seems like it would relieve a lot of pressure because there's all those little things that come up day to day where you just to get validation or another perspective. It seems like what you did was self-create your own little professional services group of like-minded people that you
Mm-hmm.
trust. So I think that's awesome. And keeping it simple then, so you have a CPA once your business got big enough, and then that's more or less it. I'm sure that won't apply to every business. Some people may need a
Yeah,
lawyer or something like that, but for a
absolutely.
simple, straightforward business, that's a really nice way to do it that keeps your costs low and all of that.
Yeah.
And I know that reading is probably a really helpful thing to be able to do, right? If you're looking around for resources, you've talked about individuals who can help you, but sometimes just reading a book can be a
Mm-hmm.
useful way to get information. So what was the book that you would say was just if someone had to go out to their library or Amazon today, like what's the number one book that someone who's got their own business should think about buying?
Yeah, I think I've read so many books on entrepreneurship in general, but I think the book called Profit First by, I have his name written
Mm.
down here, Mike Kalowicz, I think is how you say his last name, but Profit First is the name of the book. And I found it really just changed the way I thought about taking profits and income
Mm.
out of, like my income out of the business income. So by prioritizing how, taking out a percentage first for profit, just really changed the way I thought about the success of my business. I think so often you think about, okay, you have your income and then you take the expenses out and then whatever is left over is your profit and your piece of the pie. But flipping the script on that a little bit and thinking about the business income and then taking out profit first, taking out your income, and then whatever is left over is for the business expenses, just really changed the way that I thought about the like higher level accounting within my photography business.
That's awesome. And I've heard from a lot of clients that that book has helped them rethink about shaping their accounts, and then they end up shaping their literal accounts around some of the
Yeah.
recommendations that come out. So it's helpful for that structure that we talked about, right? You know, one question that I get all the time from clients. So when you're working at a job, you have a W-2 job, you get a paycheck, people know, oh, I get $2,000 biweekly. I get $4,000 every month, right? Like it's just a known thing. It's going to hit your checking account, all of that. Totally not true and not the case for somebody who owns their own business. Like I
Mhm.
might make 1,000 this month and then 7,000 the next month, or I only work the summer or whatever it is. So variable income, but
Mhm.
expenses that are a little more fixed is just a large mental difficulty, a hurdle sometimes to get over. So how do you get over it, and how would you recommend other people handle that situation?
So I feel like this goes back to really understanding, you know, that like the client life cycle, what your expenses really are, so that there are no hidden massive expenses that'll, pop up in the year and really trip you up. But if you have a really solid idea of your expenses, what's coming out each month, what's coming out maybe one time per year, it is a little bit easier to make sure you kind of manage that cash flow. There are a couple of methods that you could employ, which is, possibly utilizing a credit card for those reoccurring subscriptions, and then just making sure that every time you do get, a job or, that business income, that you are setting aside a certain percentage of it to pay off that credit card, or even using something like Ally with the way that they have their like their bucket system.
This is Ally Bank,
Kind
the savings
Yes,
account.
Ally Bank. Yeah. So you could have maybe like a checking and then a savings account, and distributing all of the income into each of those buckets according to the correct percentages for yourself, and then having it kind of pull from the checking. And Ally is interesting because, and I don't know if this is the way it's always been, but I know what they're doing now is if you have, those checking and savings tied together, is that if your checking account is going to be overdrawn, they'll actually pull from your savings. So you can kind of have like a buffer built into kind of that core bucket of the savings account, if you will. And then also just understanding, and it'll take a little bit of time too, especially, when you get going, is maybe if your business is seasonal, just making sure that you understand that if you get a really big paycheck in the summer, that's going to have to last you, you know, say if it's half your income is in the summer and then you're completely dead in the winter, the winter months in the fall. Just really making sure that you understand that one paycheck is gonna, essentially have to be divided in two. And just making a plan for yourself and being aware. And if you're still trying to figure it out and you're not quite sure, maybe going, that the credit card route would make the most sense. And then also you could take advantage of maybe some points or, different rewards and things like that.
And it's hardest, I'm sure, in the beginning when you're still trying to get your cash flows all figured out. And then once you're
Yeah.
settled in, it really just seems like you need a little extra buffer, right? You need a little
Mm-hmm.
more buffer in your savings account than someone who's got a consistent, steady paycheck might. But the setup you described means that you don't have to worry if 1 month
Right.
you didn't get quite as much income because you can
Right.
backfill your checking from your savings
Right. Right.
and go from there.
Yeah. And a lot of people are working, maybe they could still be working full time. That'll help a little bit just with maybe the anxiety around when expenses are going to come out. And then I think as you maybe possibly phase out of full-time work into, your small business, hopefully your clientele will have been built up enough at that point that you should be able to sustain any low months, what have you. But it is not very clear exactly what to do in general, I feel like with small businesses, even just like how to get going the right way. So yeah, do some research, reach out to people. Yeah.
And it is something where I've noticed the CPA relationship does start to become helpful there because for all these
Mm-hmm.
small business accounts, whether it's a SEP IRA or a solo 401k, part of that difficult computation of how much you can contribute is taking
Mm-hmm.
an IRS calculation of a percentage of your net income from
Right.
self-employment. And like those are just very difficult things to get right without some help. So once you have
Right.
that CPA, that's a good resource to, I'm sure, lean into to say like, hey, how much can I actually fund into this account for the year?
Yeah. Yeah, and
Uh,
you would be surprised at how many people are willing to just give you a little bit of their time. I would never assume that, say, a CPA is going to give you advice for free. But in my experience, people are generally willing to help, especially when it's like around that kind of education
mhm.
piece.
That makes perfect sense. And, I don't know if you have a very firm opinion on this one or not, but I would say one of the more common questions I get from my clients who are self-employed with their own business is they reach a point where they start to hear like, oh, should I do this S corp thing? Should I just like keep
Mm.
being a solo practitioner? Or I've heard there are these tax benefits from being taxed differently as an S corp. So was that something that you ever came to as a decision, or that you've known people in your circle who did, and how they went about thinking about that process?
It's not something that I have thought about personally for myself. It's so nuanced with everyone, and everyone's income is obviously completely different. And I feel like that's kind of a factor. How much taxes you're going to pay on the money, depending on if you take it all in as like a sole proprietor, if you do have the S corp. Um, so I think that like if that's just something that you are interested in understanding, just doing some research on it and talking to a CPA, maybe talking to an attorney too, just from like a legal
Mhm.
standpoint and figuring out like the legal benefits or protections that may come along with that, and then talking to the CPA to figure out from a tax perspective, if there may be benefits there, why or why not.
That makes perfect sense. And all right, so I think we covered a lot of the details. And so then just the last question to close with is you're thinking back to your now long experience as a
Mm.
solo business owner. What is the number one thing that you would tell somebody who to think about somebody who's early in their career or struggling a little bit? Like, what is the number one thing you've learned that you would like to impart as that one core piece of wisdom to take away?
Yeah. I feel like this is kind of like when people ask you what your favorite song is, your favorite movie, and you're like, well, there isn't just one.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
there's going to be a couple
Go for it.
pieces of
Yeah.
advice. Okay. So I would say start by joining groups, which I've touched on a few times. I think that owning your own business, depending on what the type of business is, can feel really lonely. So, joining some groups so you can connect with people, whether it's online or you can meet up locally, is, huge from an emotional standpoint. And also, like I said, just to begin like developing those relationships and hopefully maybe a mentorship, depending on what you're doing. And then educate yourself in general. There is so much information on the internet, which is great, and it can also be overwhelming. So don't be afraid to ask for help. And even if you are already in business and you're like, wait, I don't think I'm doing this right, or maybe you just want someone to look over the way that you're doing things or the way your business is structured, there should be no shame in reaching out to people to ask for help. We touched on retirement a little bit, but from like a practical standpoint, I do think, factoring that in from the beginning, I feel like, when you start a small business, you're like, well, I'm not making any money yet, or I'm only making a little bit of money. And so you're so worried about just building this business that you forget about these longer term goals, or you're just
Mm.
like, I don't know, you just think it's like not important. So trying to factor that in, and I would put that under the category of when you're thinking about your personal expenses as a human and how much you need to earn. I would kind of put how much you should save for retirement into that part of the equation and not just into the business expenses part of the equation. And then I think from an emotional standpoint, I would say just to be kind to yourself and have confidence and know that there are people that you are probably inspiring just by going out there and doing the thing that you want to do, because there are so many people who have all these lofty dreams and they never go out and do them. So just by going out there and trying, regardless of the success or failure, is a massive accomplishment.
I completely agree with that last part, especially. It's because I've thought so many times from my own self about, oh, maybe I could do X or maybe I could do Y, and just got totally scared to
Hmm.
do it and have reverted to like, oh, it's just easier to be part of a team. It's easier to be part of a company. So
Yeah.
I have so much respect for people who go out and try, and no matter how much success they have, none, a little bit, a
Yeah.
lot. Like it's really cool that you're doing something that you enjoy and you're trying to make it work. So I appreciate all of the thoughts and advice, and it's awesome to hear about your success and that you continue to
Yeah.
do it with your husband. And so I appreciate the time, and that's awesome. Thanks so much, Sarah.
Yeah, you're welcome.